Welcome everybody to our first game design Q&A in the last few months. I am Josh Blaser from Game Wisdom, and joining me tonight as my co-host and I guess guest answerer here from Game Dev Underground, please welcome Tim Ruswick.
What's up, everybody?
Hey Tim, how are you doing?
I am fantastic, and I'm ready to make this happen.
Oh yeah, I'm sure we'll get lots of questions from the fans. And for anyone watching this recorded right now, we're going to try and do some of these maybe a little bit more regularly, depending upon how our schedules look. So if you have any questions for future episodes, let us know in the comments. But for people who are new watching us, Tim, could you talk a little bit about your channel and what is Game Dev Underground?
So, Game Dev Underground is a channel focused at developers, but it's really kind of spans all kinds of creative fields, and it's focused on the idea that there's a whole lot more to learn than what they teach you in school, right? There's a whole lot more to game development than just making a game. There's all kinds of stuff as far as like the motivation, the design aspect, the development. There are 1,000 things outside of the physical act of making a game that it takes to make something creative. And Game Dev Underground is a community and YouTube channel that kind of showcases all those different things, and we talk about all the topics nobody really wants to touch. So it's a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. And I know you kind of found me when you were looking at like inspirations for like game design videos and more topics relating to it here on YouTube. And as you just said, there really aren't a lot of, I guess, easy to understand lessons when it comes to game design out there. And that's kind of going into my book series that we're going to work on in terms, or what I'm working on, the Game Design Dive, where I'm basically picking a lesson or a system on game design and then just going all out into it, talking about what works, examples, and essentially the history of the design. Because there really aren't a lot of like really knowledgeable or reputable sources of information out there when it comes to game design.
No, I agree. There's not a lot of places at all, really. Way less than there should be for an industry of this size. Like
Mm-hmm.
games are bigger than movies and music combined, and there is like comparatively to you look at like movies or you look at music, like it almost seems like there's a lack of knowledge outside of like BDC talks and like
Mm-hmm.
10 YouTube channels that I know of. There's not that much stuff out there, and anybody that focuses specifically on design, that's one of the reasons why I love your channel, is because like it's hard to understand the design thinking, the design process. Like we only see the finished results. We don't see the thousands of things that developers went through while they're making a game. So when we see that the jump works a certain way or the enemies do a certain thing, sometimes we don't know why, and we don't even know why that works well and why it doesn't. So it helps to have someone to kind of go through and analyze that stuff and tell us, hey, I think it works because this, doesn't work because that, and that's really cool.
Yeah. And as you said, it's very hard, I think, for the general consumer to kind of see behind the curtain when it comes to game design and game mechanic discussions. It's easy to say, oh, this game sucks or this game is great. It's another matter entirely to explain why certain elements work or why, these three games over here are amazing, and yet these three games of the same exact genre aren't that as well designed.
It's really hard even when you're playing the games.
Mm-hmm.
Like even when you're literally playing the games,
Yeah.
it's hard to tell what you like, what you don't like. Sometimes it's just altogether coherent experience. And without that design knowledge of someone like yourself,
Mm-hmm.
going through it, like yeah, it's almost impossible, I think.
Mm-hmm. And welcome to all the fans of Game Dev Underground joining us. I'm sure a lot of you are fans of mine as well, and for the new folks, thanks for coming on. But with that said, let's get to our first topic, and I figure I was going to pose one to Tim and to the audience, and then for everyone watching us live right now, leave questions in the comments there, and we'll get to them. I figure we'll spend probably an hour to an hour and a half, I think, total for the stream. And like I said, if we have a free time in the future and there is enough interest, we can certainly do another part or two as time goes on. But with that said, the question I just posed to Tim before we started the stream is about the concept of knowing when to stop in terms of making a game. And this is one of those topics that, again, I think for a lot of people, it sounds, I think, simpler than it is. Just stop making a game. If you say your game is 10 levels long, you get to level 10, it's done. We're done. Put the game up on Steam, we're all going to be rich. But there's always that voice in the back of your head saying you can always do more. Or you start testing things around, going, hey, maybe this idea is better than this one. Maybe I can just keep going. And, if a 10 level game is good, surely a 20 to 30 level game is even better. And kind of the inspiration for this question came from the Nintendo Direct, that for people watching us record it right now will probably be at least a week or so old, but for us watching live, Nintendo put out, of course, their it's almost like I think a monthly or every bi-monthly show, this time focusing on Smash Bros. Ultimate. Basically, it's going to be the be-all Smash Brothers game. Now, I'm pretty sure the design team will all, disappear when this is done. They'll never want to work on another game again. And they've announced a lot of stuff for Smash Bros. Ultimate. You have 75 characters at start. You have multiple game modes. They've announced their own original story mode. They've announced different multiplayers, different characters. You name it, all kinds of soundtracks and art. And they just announced, as kind of the final Nintendo Direct before the game was released, that they're adding in a completely brand new subsystem where you attach characters or spirits to the Nintendo characters to boost them up, and then you collect more spirits and you can level them up and evolve them, because of course you can evolve characters in a Nintendo game. And this is even further tied to their story, which the cutscene, which, Tim, if you get a chance, you should watch this in terms of just sheer WTF. It basically starts with, like, the apocalypse, with, like, every Nintendo character except for Kirby getting killed. And I'm not kidding, everyone just gets wiped out in, like, the first minute and a half of this cutscene. So Nintendo's really going all out for it. But, bringing this back to the topic at hand, I can't even imagine the discussions they've had at Sora, I think that's the name of the developer, who has been keep on adding and adding more to this franchise. So I've been talking for the last 2-3 minutes. I'm going to turn it over to you, Tim. Like, from like your own work and from what you've seen and like talked to other developers about, like, where do you think, like, what do you think is a good place to start in terms of trying to understand just how much you want to put into a video game?
I think there's a lot to unpack there. First, I would say, like, Smash Bros. And Nintendo. Well, obviously, Nintendo's very they have a ton of experience, right? But on top of that, Smash Bros. Is a franchise that has had a ton of iterative designs, right? They started with something, then they added a bunch more for another version, added a bunch more. And I always think that that's always safer to do, right? Start out with something cool. It works really well. Everybody likes it. So you come up with something cooler that has a little bit more and a little bit more. So I always think it's a better approach than like just starting with Smash Bros. Ultimate, right? The end-all be-all of Ultimate Smash Bros. But that being said, how do you figure out how much is too much when you're designing? I've kind of got two approaches to this because, one, I have my brain as a developer, right? Because I'm actually going through this right now. I have a game coming out in February, which means it has to be done by the end of the year. I'm at the point where, like, I have to start cutting stuff. There's no longer adding stuff, right? Like, if I want to meet that deadline, I got to start cutting stuff. But then also I got the hat of, like, Kingdom of Underground, which is like, I played a bunch of people's games. I've talked to a bunch of developers. I see a bunch of people go through stuff, so I can understand it from their perspective. And what I would say is, like, how much is too much? I think there comes a point, and this takes objectivity. It takes clarity, which means you have to step back every once in a while. But if you have that objectivity and you can look at the game and say, this thing that I'm adding, it always has a trade-off, right? You have to understand that as a designer. It doesn't matter, even if it's the best thing ever, there's always something else that you're trading for it. And a lot of times what you're trading for mechanics, if you add in a bomb mechanic or a jump mechanic or whatever it is, you're trading complexity to learn most of the time for a payoff of the mechanic that it brings the design, right? And there's a lot of mechanics, especially in like puzzle games or other types of games that have kind of creative solutions to them. I see a lot of people, they add in mechanics that I think are lopsided on the complexity to learn. Whereas they might be fun, but if they're too complex to learn and your audience doesn't really understand them, you have to trade that off. I don't think there's a direct answer to say, okay, this is how you know when too much is designed. but I think you have to take in a bunch of stuff in account. Your deadline, what you try and create, who your audience is, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically my answer.
All right. And before we go on, I'm getting some kind of like a stuttering and lag from your feed, Tim. I'm not sure if it's an
I'm
internet
getting a
issue.
little bit from you too. I'm not really sure.
All
Maybe
right.
Discord.
All right. You want to try restarting the call really quickly, or I guess worst comes to worst, we can always switch over to Skype if that is a problem. I guess for people watching us right now, is it good on your end? Because if it's still good, we'll just keep going unless it gets so bad that nobody can actually understand us. Okay.
Yeah, they say audio.
All right. In that case, let's keep going. Yeah, and I agree with you, Tim, about that in terms of pretty much understanding like what it is you're trying to achieve. Because again, we both have played our fair share of indie games. I do my grab bag streams. I think you have a regular show on your stream, right, where you play games people submit, right?
Yeah, Feedback Friday.
Mm-hmm. And we both have seen, like, from first-time developers and even established developers, just a smorgasbord of ideas and design. And it's always very hard, like especially when you talk about games that combine genres. Like a really good example that I play would be something like Moonlighter, which is another one of the shop simulator slash action RPG slash roguelike games. And it's always hard when you're combining genres to understand, what am I taking from these genres, and am I leaving the stuff that brings people to them? Like, I made a post about this a few months ago regarding shop simulators, and like for me, a lot of the ones that I've seen, especially from the mobile and free-to-play space, completely remove the combat or the ARPG side. But like to me, you're basically leaving out, half the food on your plate there. But then there are games that leave out the entire shop simulator, and then there's just no aspect there. And it comes to that, I think it leads to the situation of, you're trying to appeal to everybody, but you're really appealing to nobody with what you're trying to make.
Yeah, I think it's always a trade-off, and that's one thing that took me a long time to learn. Is like everything in design is a trade-off. It doesn't matter how perfect the mechanic is. It doesn't matter how much you think you know about design. It doesn't matter anything. Everything in design has trade-off, and I think the key is to not deny that and to understand that. Like even if it's just adding in a jump character, that jump is going to be an extra button press, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's added complexity. So right there, like you have to understand that at some point a game is too complex to learn in a couple of minutes. And once you pass that point, you have to make sure that your audience is willing to give in more than a couple minutes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and so I think a lot of designers don't actually go that far. They don't think about their audience. They don't think about stuff. They just kind of wing it. They just kind of like, oh, this feels fun. This feels fun. This doesn't. I don't like this. I tried this. I don't like this. Which I've been able to do that too. I think I have a video about how sometimes it's easier to discover the fun than design it. Just because design is so complex, but yeah, it's you combine two genres, and some people leave out certain things, some people add certain things, and it's crazy. And you look at like Crypto the Necrodancer, that game did really, really well, and those are two genres I would have thought would be completely incompatible, but the execution of it was flawless, and I'm sure it took a lot of iteration. Right, and we talked about Nintendo, how they kind of iterated on Smash Bros. I think iteration is the key to kind of designing something great. I think there's a gray area there on how when you stop iterating and when you're ready to launch. I think that's a whole lot of it comes down to your business objectives and your personal stuff. I know, like for me personally, my game Philophobia, I'm at the point, like I said, where I have to start cutting stuff because it's down a few months. But it is, I'm either gonna delay it another year or I'm gonna finish it. And like I have to finish it myself because like I don't feel like I can. The game's gone on too long for me, right? It's too long of a project for me. I need to move on to different projects. So for me, I'm moving on. Like that's kind of where I'm at, and that's a design decision that I made because that means that I have a hard stop on when I'm gonna complete the game.
Mm-hmm. And I'm just noticing OBS is like stuttering and sputtering for a second. For the people watching us right now, okay, it looks like it's stable now. Let me know if things get too out of control in terms of the audio or video issues. If it does, we'll switch over to Skype on that front. But yeah, getting back to your point, Tim, yeah, when it comes to game design, understanding iteration is such a key part of what makes these games work. And it's what we've said many times before that the best games that we've played, they don't just happen perfectly on your first try. No game developer in their right mind would ever say that I've had the perfect game experience, from day one to the final minute, nothing bad happened. This game happened exactly as I wanted. And it's important, I think, to have some semblance of a game plan, some idea of what your core gameplay loop is for your title, and that kind of becomes the foundation or the blueprint for everything else going forward. Because if you change your core gameplay loop, then you have a completely new game. And we typically see from a lot of games that tend to either suffer or don't feel as well as or don't feel as great as they should be, that we usually hear stories that something was added like 50% of the way through, or at some point in terms of game development, the developer had to cut something or it didn't work, and then they had to spend more time kind of rechasing what they originally had.
Yeah, I for a long time I thought like AAA games were different. I thought, as a solo indie, someone making a game all by itself, I thought I was different than the guys that had 200 people in 5 years and $2.5 million or $200 million sitting on a game. But after going to GDC and like talking to actual developers and like talking to developers of some of my favorite games, I've talked to guys from Bungie, which made Halo and Destiny. I talked to developers from a bunch of different studios, and there's always something.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my favorite question to ask now when I meet like AAA devs. Is like, what did you guys got in that kit? Like in BioShock, what did you want to make it that didn't make it in? Because there's always something like, or what changed, or what was crazy, what was the epiphany you had? Because there's always something like that. I think that's one of the bigger mistakes that newer developers make is they look at the face value of things, right? And I still like this too. Like I remember I'm making a platformer, right? And I play Hollow Knight, and I'm like, Hollow Knight is amazing. It's beautiful. It feels great, and it's easy for me to compare my work in progress to the finished project, right? And that's unfair because it's been through so much iteration. It's been through so much stuff. You have to kind of take that into account.
Yeah, and it's always very interesting. Like, we really don't hear enough of this point, but when we see developers kind of show, like, previous prototypes or design demos of their games kind of going through the iteration process again, and seeing how things go from A to Z in that front. Because as you said, most consumers, are probably like 90% of the people who play video games, they only see the finished product. It really wasn't until this past decade with early access and Kickstarter that you're able to see a game at version 0.10 or early alpha, beta, or even something later than that. And it's very hard, I think, as you said, for developers to understand that a game like Shovel Knight, that didn't just pop into being as Shovel Knight. It took them many months. I think the stories talking to Yacht Club Games was that they went through, they went over their initial budget and time for that game to try to get to the state that was in as 1.0, let alone after all the expansions, and they're even still working on one final one right now.
Yeah. I think it's, especially like, the scope for a lot of developers is the first thing that gets. If you're a new developer, if you're just starting development, the very first thing you do wrong is you overscope. Like, I think most developers can do that. And I think the problem with that is there's two problems with that. One, there's an actual business problem with it, because if you overscope, then that means you are over budget, you are over time, and if you need a return on that money to actually make sure that you can eat in the morning, right? But two, there's a design problem with that, because the second that you overscope, it's super easy to just keep overscoping and adding things. And overscoping is really easy to do in your head. Say, I want to make a sci-fi game, and it should have space travel, and it should have alien battles, and it should have different currencies for all the different aliens, and it should have faction systems for all the different. And that's great, but once you go down that path, like you, first of all, there's no end to that path ever. Like you'll keep coming up with stuff. But on top of that, like you need to understand the core of the game and what makes the game fun. And that's why like I'm a huge advocate of game jams, making games in like 48 hours, 72 hours, or in like 7 days. These little kind of competition things. Because you can build the heart of a game in that time. You can't build all the content, you can't build 100 levels, but you can build a core, right? You can build maybe the fun part of a roguelike. But once you get that down, then it's iterating. That's why I always say you want to start with a prototype, you want to start with a vertical slice, because that's the core. You can build on top of it. That's much safer from a design perspective and a business perspective than designing this big, massive game and then getting to work building on.
Yeah. And yeah, as you said, I think it's a great analogy to like other industries. Like we've seen projects that start at the macro level and then it's about, scaling things down. But it seems like for game design, it's more about the opposite. You want to start with something that's very focused and then slowly scale things up while still, as you say, keeping that heart of what the project is.
Yeah. And that's the problem so many people make. So they lose that heart, like, especially for a couple of years.
Yeah. And going back to a point you said a few minutes ago regarding understanding like your budget and being able to keep to a time frame like that, I know that is incredibly hard to do, again, when it comes to going over scale. I remember talking to Jake Burgett, who of Gray Alien Games. He released Shadowhand last year. And again, this was a project that he said was only supposed to take, I think, like 6 months to a year. But it's still, like, even for someone who's been in the game industry for more than a decade working on games, he still went over what he originally wanted. And that takes me to, I think, the second part of this question. Then we'll answer, I think, Gladius asked a question earlier. We'll get to his. And then for anyone else who has a question, feel free to leave it. But it's that idea of, as we've said before, the game design is not an exact science. You never know when you're first starting out where a game's going to go. And there's that temptation, as we've said, to keep adding. You, of course, brought like the space example, and that I think basically describes Star Citizen's development in a nutshell. And so they're just adding and adding. But then we hear stories of developers who do decide to push things further, and they succeed from where they originally intended. Games that have gone longer in terms of development, such as Owlboy, Celeste, and as we said, even those very experimental games that they just kind of feel like the developer was just throwing things against the wall, and it somehow turns into a Picasso. So, like, when we talk about those kinds of games, where it just feels like, we have this, like, almost controlled chaos situation. Like, what do you think about that from a design perspective?
I think so. A lot of people they make they make the mistake of assuming that game industry is like the business industry, like it's like creating a product and stuff. But games are actually more similar to movies and music and art form in that regard. Because if you think it like the way that startup investing works, the way that movie investing works is movie studios have a bunch of money. Maybe in like startup they would have hundreds of thousands of dollars from various investors, right? What they would do is they look at 10 startups or 10 movies, and they say, we're going to greenlight these ones, and they're going to hope that one or two are big enough hits to return all of their money. All 10 are not going to be hits, movies or startups or companies, ever. But it's more of a guessing game. It's more of intuition. It uses more empathy than it does logical thinking, because at the end of the day, it's like it's throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. And that's why I think start small is really, really important, because if you try and design something that crazy massive, no one can tell you that you're wrong. No one can tell you that you should have stopped. No one can tell startups and developers that they're overscoping, which even though they have all the signs of overscoping, right? Like every single one, I'm just like, whoa, do what now? And I hear about new stuff. So yeah, in my opinion, they are overscoping, but I can't tell them that because at the end of the day, what if that's what people want, and what if they do well, really, really well with the game? And I've heard of the game, you've heard of the game, must be doing something right? So even design rules are not really rules. They're more like guidelines, right? They're more like people experience from the past. And I think the main way to figure out whether you're on the right track is to figure out what your objectives are. If you want to be a financial success, if you want to make money, you want to make more money than you spend, it is way bigger of a risk to spend 5 years on a game instead of 5 months, right? Because if you spend 5 months on a game, the chances of you returning on your investment much higher because it costs much less. You don't have to make much more, right? Or if you spend 5 years, that's a big risk. And you look at the average lifespan of 75 years of a human being, that's a big chunk of your life too. So it's not that those things are bad. It's just that if you look at risk versus reward, you look at ROI, you look at it from a business perspective, some things are riskier. But you know what? In startups, just like movies, just like all these other entertainment industry fields, the big risk is usually the big reward, right? I don't know if you remember Paranormal Activity. That movie cost $15,000 to make. I think it made $200 million. Okay, that's a crazy thing that nobody ever would have. There are games like that too. Right?
Oh yeah,
Rogue Legacy was super quick and it made a ton of money. And I don't think anybody could have ever said, "Hey, that's we're gonna do this. We're gonna make $200 million." But it just worked out though, and I think it's more intuition, it's more empathy in design, it's more understanding what you want, and talking to people, iterating, than it is an actual conscious design process. And I think people just need to think about why they're doing what they're doing, and I think everything else kind of answers itself from there.
Yeah, really good points there, Tim. And like you said, when it comes to game design, there is no exact science. Neither Tim nor I know the exact checklist of how to make a $100 million best-selling game. And as you said, there are games that nobody would think would do well that become major successes. I can even think of stuff like Five Nights at Freddy's and Stardew Valley. And then there are games that people bank on being successes that still end up failing. And even established developers can still fall prey to this. And you mentioned Rogue Legacy. I know Foreign's mentioning it as well in chat. I know that their second game, Full Metal Valkyries, Full Metal Furies, that did not do anywhere near as well as they thought it would. Even a game like Where the Water Tastes Like Wine, which critics were hyping this game up for months, talking about this, it came out and then it dropped like a lead balloon. And again, and as you said, like, everything is about risks when it comes to video games and just about business in general. And there are things that, you can put your heart into and it can sometimes work out for you. But the more things you can do to mitigate those risks, again, doing proper planning, understanding your scope, play testing, all these things can help stack the deck in your favor. Now, of course, with that said, though, it's still not 100% guaranteed. There is no 100% guaranteed game, but anything you can do to make your life a little bit easier or make things a little less worrisome is going to ultimately be better. And my final point, and I'll throw it to you, Tim, and then we'll go back to some questions from the audience, is that when I look at games that succeed, the ones that do turn out to be the best ones, you will notice, I think there's usually a pattern of these developers. They usually understand the development scope. They, do proper planning. They do marketing. And I think, as we've said, I think we may have talked about this on our last chat, that we see developers who willingly ignore certain things, such as PR or being able to do playtesting. And while those games can certainly succeed, it makes it a lot harder for them to do it compared to someone who kind of follows these guidelines.
I agree, and that's why I mentioned empathy,
Mm-hmm.
because when a lot of people think of marketing, they don't necessarily think of empathy. They think of advertising, they think of billboards, they think of flyers, they think of
Mm-hmm.
like all the, running ads and stuff. They think of all that crazy stuff. But when I say empathy, I mean understanding another human's
Mm-hmm.
feelings about something. That's really important because a lot of people's empathy consists of a bunch of projection. They
Mm-hmm.
think they have grown up in this world, and they're 20, 30, 50 years of life, whatever it is, and they've acquired a bunch of experiences in life, and they think that everyone else thinks the same way. So when they say a word, they
Mm-hmm.
think that that other person hears the word the same way. When they create a game, they think the other person experiences the game the same way. But empathy is the ability to understand other people have different experiences of the
Mm-hmm.
same thing, right? Like when you're in a relationship with somebody and you say, I'll be home at 8, right? And they are super, super, super on point about their times. They're never late for anything, and they're on point. And you mean 8, meaning like 7:45 or 8:15 or whatever. And those two things happen. You're saying the same thing, but communication is definitely depending on the person, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so it can lead to negative effects. And so that's why empathy, I think, um, it's really important to have from a marketing perspective because people, like you said, developers, they forego PR sometimes. They say, "Oh, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that," and then everyone says, "Oh, well, these guys were made $1 million, but they didn't do PR, so I don't got to do PR." What you don't get is that dude probably spent 6 months on his thumbnail, or they worked really hard on the title of the game and they happen to put a keyword in it to where it shows up higher in Google,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or some other thing that requires empathy to understand. It
Yep.
requires understanding how other human beings see the thing that you're creating, and that's why playtesting is super. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, like we said, you talked about a checklist of things to do. There's no checklist in marketing or in design because it's more about understanding the other people's experiences than it is about making a checklist of the right things to do because the right things to do change depending on who's playing. That's
Mm-hmm.
the same thing.
Yep. And it's the same thing, I think, about doing stuff like what we do on YouTube. It's about putting on a personal face. It's about being able to
Yeah.
represent yourself and not, come off as being fakey or just an online personality. Because as you said, people connect to you if you reach out to them. And it's the same thing when we talk about game design, as you said. Just because you think your platformer is, the greatest game ever, doesn't mean that an audience of 100,000 people may think so. They may think there's something wrong there, or they may like certain ideas. And it's up to you to, again, kind of weave all that stuff together to make something that's presentable.
Yeah. And I think the really talented people have the empathy to see what the 100,000 people see instead of what they see. Not always instead of, but sometimes combine the two,
Yeah.
right? Or see opportunities where other people don't see it. I think there's an old quote by Henry Ford that said, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse,
Yeah.
right? And he built car. And it's times like that where like he had the empathy to understand the need, not just what people said they wanted. He understood the people.
Mm-hmm.
He understood the human need of transportation rather than the solution of a horse.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what you got to do as a designer.
Mm-hmm. And if we're not careful, we could maybe spend the next hour and a half just on this one topic. So we did get a few questions from the audience, and if anyone has any more questions for us, be sure to leave them down below. But this was a question that was asked, when we first started. This was about 80 minutes ago at this rate. Gladius asked, "What do you think about DayZ and Scum losing players?" I heard of DayZ. Do you know what Scum is?
I do not.
I'm assuming it must be another battle royale slash King of the Hill style game. But I guess since we last spoke, the whole battle royale genre has certainly taken on a major life. And I've spoken about this many times here, but I guess for you, Tim, like, what do you make of battle royale, like, from where you're at in terms of designing games?
I think I don't know if anybody's familiar with the history of how that all came about, but if I'm not mistaken, I believe PUBG was actually a mod of DayZ originally. I think he started with the DayZ platform, and he thought that DayZ was awesome, but rather than have anybody go anywhere, you should restrict them in and kind of take the cool things about DayZ, which was the PvP combat, and throw them in a place where they can all kind of battle it out. And I think that's a perfect example of empathy, right? The DayZ developers, they had so much opportunity to do some cool stuff with that game, and they stuck to their guns and didn't listen to anybody and didn't listen to player feedback. Whereas the guy that made PUBG, he just said, hey, I like this, I like that, I don't like that. I think me and my friends are having a bunch of fun doing just this part of DayZ. We're going to take that and make its own game. 100 million copies later, you know, he's sitting pretty, and DayZ is struggling for players. I think it is a perfect example of empathy and understanding the needs of players. And I'm not surprised that DayZ loses players. Again, I don't want to talk negative about any developer or their project, but they've, you know, how long has their development process been going? How long have they been trying to get it out? I think this is a perfect example of overscoping and waiting too long to do something when people can do faster.
Yeah, and I think, like, continue with your line of thought there regarding empathy. I think we really see this from the modding-based community, because modders, of course, are gamers too. They're not, you know, most of the time they're not full-on game developers. They're looking at a product, going, you know, I like this, but what if we could make something a little bit better? What if I could tweak something that I like? Let me do that. But wait, maybe other people would like to do that as well. I'll put this mod up and see what happens. And so many interesting and unique mods have been developed from that standpoint. Again, I'm sure everybody watching us right here probably has played Half-Life at some point in their life, and the sheer number of full and partial conversion mods for Half-Life have been something else, or even the Elder Scrolls series. Again, I don't even want to imagine how many mods have been released for those games combined. Very recently, I spoke with, I think his name was John Lumpkins of Pavones Interactive. They did the mod, The Long War for XCOM. And he explicitly said that the whole reason for that coming to being was, I liked XCOM, but I wanted to do something more with it. I would like to see something that the game didn't do. And it turned out that a whole lot of other people also liked that as well. And it basically gave them the launch pad to start their own game studio. And bringing this back to like the Battle Royale craze, we're really seeing like these like different trends in terms of somebody likes a certain aspect of Battle Royale, let me take things in this direction. And I mean, Fortnite is just, that to me is just like the wild card, like just came out of nowhere kind of thing. For you know, the younger people watching us who didn't really follow Fortnite's development, it originally started as kind of a horde-based survival game with like a building element, and then they thought, well, people like Battle Royale, let's make a sub game of Battle Royale, and now it's become this giant. And I guess like I never saw that coming. I guess did you ever like think that was going to happen with Fortnite?
No, actually, I was on a Skype call with the CEO of the company. There's a Tiny Build. Tiny Build, and he asked me about Fortnite, and I was like, "Oh, that's that survival game, right?" Not having any idea that at the time that it was blowing up, and I always feel stupid about that conversation. Oh, but he knew, and I didn't know. No, I didn't see that coming at all, and I mean, that's a perfect example of iteration, right? That's a smart business move. It was a smart pivot, and I believe they made the whole Battle Royale system for Fortnite in under 3 months.
Yeah.
And they put it out there as a test because they saw the success of PUBG. And there's legal and ethical issues surrounding that because PUBG uses Unreal and the developers of Unreal, they steal game mechanics. I don't really steal mechanics. Just like you can't steal plot devices story elements or that kind of thing. But yeah, they capitalize on an opportunity, and they saw something that other people were just beginning to see at the beginning of a trend, and they hopped on it early. And I think they did a fantastic job.
Mm-hmm. And I think what's very interesting about the whole Fortnite and just this rise of Battle Royale is that, as you said, they were kind of like the first to take like the AAA approach, or even maybe even AA. It's hard to tell sometimes with like how these developments started. But we've seen other developers trying to copy Fortnite's success. We had Radical Heights that led to the end of Cliffy B's studio. We're seeing so many developers trying to pop up and do their own take on Fortnite or Battle Royale. And I guess I'm just not, I guess from where I'm saying, I don't think these games are going to work that well. Even if they try to put their own unique spin on it, I think we're running to that case of everybody is trying to chase after the king.
I've always held the opinion that by the time everybody notices, it's too late. I'm the same thing. I think all the developers are trying to get the game on Switch right now, and I think the fact that everybody knows that means too late. Like it's beyond the point where it's a gold mine, right? Chasing trends is like one of the easiest ways to go bankrupt. And it's also, and here's the thing, even if you chase trends, you are going to have to fight with everybody on the way up.
Yep.
If you make another board battle royale, you are competing with PUBG, you're competing with Fortnite, you're competing with Call of Duty now.
Yeah.
And those guys have way better market budget. It doesn't matter who you are. They're at the top. Right? So, I mean, I don't think following a trend is a good idea, but people do it anyway. And someone is going to take a battle royale. You can quote me on this. Someone's going to take a battle royale. They're going to make a tweak to it, and it's going to be a massive deal because they saw something that nobody else saw, and they changed it a little bit, and now it's even more interesting and it's even more fun. And that's just how the industry works. Any creative industry.
Chris is saying in chat, unless you can pull a Blizzard, yeah. But yeah, pulling a Blizzard though, that is definitely not something you can plan for. I think that's another thing that if either of us knew how to do that, we would be rich by now. But
Blizzard also has resources just like Activision, and if anytime you have resources at that level, you can make stuff happen.
Yeah,
right. Like a battle royale in a Call of Duty game is a lot different than something battle royale on their own.
Yep. And as you said, BlizzCon's tomorrow. I do not follow BlizzCon at all, so that news is just like, really? And I'm sure like everybody watching this right now is going, yeah, of course it is. Like, how did you not know that? But
I didn't know it either, so you're not alone.
Thank you. You can yell at both of us then, everybody. But yeah, going back to your point, like again, like you're not just fighting. Like again, like if someone wants to create another battle royale game, you're competing with everybody plus the king, and it's the same thing we've talked about before. The MMO crash. Everybody wanted to be the next World of Warcraft, but oh, that's good. But you can't just chase after a game and think, oh, I'll just earn a quarter of these fans. No, they're going to stick with that game. I am sure there are people who are so entrenched in Fortnite right now, they're probably not looking at another video game probably for the next 6 months to a year, even at that.
See, anybody that goes down that route of like, if I can only get 5% of the players, I'll do well. That is the complete wrong approach. Because here's the thing. It is a ridiculous amount of effort to get someone to play your game, even if there is no direct competition. It is hard. It is very difficult to get some random person to try your game. When you're competing directly with something else that technically does the same thing, like if it's another battle royale and you're competing with somewhere else, not only are you have the same effort to get somebody to play your game, but now you have the cost of them losing all of their investment in that game and switching, the switch cost, and that's even higher, right? And so it is really hard, even for Call of Duty. Call of Duty, one of the biggest shooter franchises ever, it's still hard for them to pull people away from Fortnite, right? And it's fucking difficult, and they have the pulling power of Call of Duty for all that time, so they're probably one of the best people to pull it off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is. Anytime someone says that, I have to kind of dismiss their opinion because they don't. They clearly don't understand how marketing business works.
Yep.
And targeting X% of someone's player base is not a good business move.
Mm-hmm. And I would say it's even worse this decade than it was last decade with the rise of games as a service, lifestyle, microtransactions like that. Because now you have that same person who also invested, let's say, an extra $100 to $200 in DLC skins, maps, dance moves, you name it. Why the hell should they switch to your game and start right back at zero again?
Yeah. I have my friend Corey has a daughter, Jaden. She's been on my stream a couple times. She plays Fortnite. All her friends play Fortnite. Fortnite is on every device that everybody owns: Android, iOS, Switch, Xbox, everything. You know, they're probably coming to Alexa or game soon. Like, it's on everything. So not only do you have to get her to play your game, you have to convince her to pay attention long enough to even play it. Two, you have to get her to lose all of the investment that she's made so far, all the skins, all the stuff that she's bought, and all the stuff she's earned, all that stuff. You have to convince her to play something that none of her friends are playing, right? That is not on the devices, that is not everywhere, that everybody doesn't know about. And then you want her to convince her friends to play it too, with you? Like, that is a massive hurdle. And I'm not saying it's impossible, but I'm saying making something to directly compete with something else that is already established is a way riskier idea than trying to create something that's somewhat new, that's somewhat interesting, that doesn't have direct competition like that. And I think indie developers that's kind of one of the pride and joy, is creating those new interesting things, mixing genres, adding cool stuff like that. I think that's where the runaway successes come up.
Yeah. And that is actually a really good segue into our next question. Neil asked this earlier. One of the things that was always discouraging for me at first was that feeling that everything has already been done. What is the point? What can I do? And I think that is a really interesting question, or a really interesting sense or a settlement from a lot of first-time developers. Because again, the game industry right now is over 30 years old. In terms of pop culture, we could argue maybe like late 90s, early thousands. But so many genres, so many standards of design have become established at this point. We've talked about this with the idea of affordances in first-person shooter design, controller layouts, and stuff like that. And as we just talked about with Battle Royale, that Battle Royale at this point, the formula is established. We know that if someone says Battle Royale to you, what that game is going to usually entail. So if you're a first-time developer sitting there going, what can I possibly make? Oh, I can make a platformer. Oh, but there's Mario, Sonic, Super Meat Boy. I can make a first-person shooter. We have all these games. And as we've said, even with the first question we asked, like, it's very hard to know just what the heart of your game is going to be, because we can drill down any game into its basic components. But it's always more than that I think, as you said, that makes that magic happen. That makes people want to play Undertale. That creates that fandom. That everybody's playing Fortnite or Call of Duty. So I guess for you, Tim, what do you think about that kind of feeling that, everything's been done before, so what should I do?
Well, first of all, I would encourage people to think about what a genre is. A genre is a classification of a bunch of stuff that's similar, right? So by the very nature, there's going to be a whole lot of similar games, right? We call it platformers because there's a bunch of games about jumping platforms. Real-time strategy games because there's a bunch of games about strategy in real time, right? That doesn't mean that once the genre is established, you can no longer ever make a game in that genre because it's not going to. It just means that you fit in that genre. That's how things work. That's how movies work. If you watch every romantic comedy, come on, they're 90% of them are the same plot, right? With different random little things here. That's how it is. And bringing something new to the table, one, I would say that you don't always have to bring a new idea to the table. You can bring a new execution to the table, and that's important. Like, you can make a game about running and jumping, just like 1,000 other games of running and jumping. If the way you do it is different, right? If the way that you run and jump is in zero gravity versus this one that has really big gravity, that game's going to play way different. So the execution matters. And two, I would say that you are the only you on the planet. You're only you. So put a little bit of you. That's the best way to kind of make something that no one else can copy. I'm making a game called Philophobia right now. It's the fear of love. And it started and I went through a really rough breakup. And this game is about love being literal hell. You're literally going through hell where all of the enemies' hearts and they're trying to, right? Mm-hmm. Someone can copy all that. Someone can take away, someone can make a game that looks just like mine. They can make the colors the same. They can make the same enemies. All the enemies can be hearts, right? They can copy all of that. But what they can't copy is my super heartbreaking experience that I can't copy all of the little details that I put in. There's 1,000 little details. Yeah. I put skulls in the game because I collect skulls. I have a skull here. It's just something that I love. There are trade cards in the game because I really like decks of cards. I really like unique different decks of cards. The only cards that are in there, the ones with hearts. There are little secrets and stuff that only I would think of because it's based on a design. It's based on an emotion that I feel. Right now, everyone can copy all of that surface level stuff, but they can't copy me. They can't copy me. And if they are designing their entire studio on the basis of copying another game or another person, they're always going to be a step behind me. Yep. And that's all I need. Right? So, two things. One, focus on the execution, not the ideas. How you make the ideas happen is more important. Number two, put you in it. And that's the main thing.
Yeah, I think that is a really good point there, Tim. And there are some really good examples of that train of thought about being able to, as you said, like put yourself into the game. Like, for instance, there was a game that came out this past year, Donut County, which was in development, I think, for several years. I think like 3 or 4 years by a developer. And in that span of time, a mobile developer basically took his idea and made like a little multiplayer, like almost like an arena kind of style out of it. And I had a chance to play the mobile version. I looked up footage of his actual game, and while the mobile version had like that same basic gameplay to it, there definitely seemed to be more. There's definitely more of like a personal feel. And there was more involvement in his game, that this was his idea that he built, rather than the developer who tried to basically take this idea and not really do anything else with it.
Yeah, execution is the difference between like some different games, right? Like even games of the same, like look at PUBG and Fortnite. So two different executions of the same idea, right? And they're drastically different.
Yeah.
So it really matters how you do it. It's just what you.
And whenever we talk about this idea of quote-unquote clones of video games, when somebody does directly take from somebody else, as you said, it feels like they're just really a step behind. I almost equate it to somebody basically copying somebody else's homework. That they may have like the right answer, but you can tell that, they don't really understand the specifics. As you said with your game, somebody can look at your title and copy it mechanic by mechanic, level by level, even aesthetic by aesthetic. But if you were to ask that person to design another level, or let's say for some strange reason it's up to them to design the sequel, they probably won't have any idea what to do, because they just simply saw what you did and then copied that. And as we've said, and I think everybody can agree with this, some of the best or most innovative games we've seen have come from that personal level of passion, of being able to say, I have this idea, I really like this, I want to make this. I don't want to make another PUBG, I don't want to make another Call of Duty, I want to make this idea. And that's how a game like Undertale came about. That's how Stardew Valley was. And again, even Stardew Valley, that, if you look at that game, that's essentially Harvest Moon. I mean, you can put the two together, they have almost exactly same mechanics. But as you said, it's the execution that's different. It's what he added to the game that made his own stamp on it. The idea of having relationships, this whole progression system. And you mentioned Tiny Build earlier. Like, I played the game Graveyard Keeper that they released earlier this year, and I was really hoping for a unique stamp on that design. But the more I played it, at least at 1.0, it just felt like I was playing Stardew Valley, but with more grinding. Like, I really wasn't seeing that unique element that was supposed to make me go, I want to play Graveyard Keeper instead of Stardew Valley. It just made me go, I want to play Stardew Valley again.
Yeah. A lot of people, they underestimate that power and that pull of games like that. And I think if that could be a perfect example of what we were talking about earlier, someone taking an idea without understanding the underlying concept of what makes it work, right? I think one of the cool things that I always remember about Harvest Moon back in the day, I haven't put much time into Stardew Valley, I can't really talk about that. But Harvest Moon back in the day was like, I felt like I was building something cool. I felt like I was creating something, and I had all my plants and I had all my stuff. I haven't seen Graveyard Keeper, but is it more about building or is it more about upkeeping?
It definitely seems more about like upkeeping and kind of like a sense of grinding, of having to do the same task day in, day out to unlock something else, which then requires more work to do. Like, it never felt like the whole, like the premise of the game, you're running a graveyard, you're managing a graveyard. That's a really effective hook. I wanted more of that. Now, they, as of literally like yesterday, like right in time for Halloween, they released an update to the game that allows you to raise zombie minions to do your work for you. And like, I was looking at it and I go, that's a great idea. Why the hell was this not in 1.0 of this game? Like, and that's kind of that issue there, that if you try to, put too much of somebody else's game in your own title, and without having, as we said, that personal touch, they're just going to want to play the better quality product. Again, I was going to bring up Blizzard here again, but Blizzard is definitely the masters of iteration. They know, they can look at a game and they will break it down to figure out every important element of it, and then they add their own touch. And what we see a lot of cases, and going back to our last question, is that Blizzard copies somebody, but then everybody else tries to copy Blizzard, but they don't have that same level of skill as Blizzard. It's why, again, why should someone play your multiplayer team-based game when they can just play Overwatch, or Hearthstone, or Heroes of the Storm, and so on?
Yeah. I think a lot of people, they go into game development trying to make a better version of the game that's already on top, right? I did that. When I first played Halo, I was like, you know what? Halo inspired me. It's the best game I've ever played. I want to make a better Halo. It was the first game that I tried to make. And that's probably the worst thing that I could possibly have done. What I should have done is try to make a better version of Palm. Or a better version of than I think like that's great to kind of get people in it, but you can't get stuck in that because at the end of the day, you can never be a better version of Overwatch than Overwatch can. Never. You can make a different game, maybe is better in some ways, but you can never make a better version of Overwatch than they can. So if you try and focus too much on what other people are doing, you try and make their thing, that's what you're going to be doing. You're always going to be step behind them. You try and focus on your thing. Like that's going to get you so much farther. Like I'm working on a platformer right now, and the platformer is probably not the best genre to make, right? It's the indies thing that everybody makes. There are hundreds of thousands of platformers out there. There are platformers for days.
Yes.
But by me making a platformer, I'm not just saying, okay, I'm just going to be run and jump and avoid the enemies and don't hit this guy. I'm putting my feelings into it. I'm putting my thoughts into it. I'm putting emotional trauma into it. I'm crafting the game around an experience that I want to deliver. And that is so much more powerful than the platformer itself. Because like a game like Philophobia, The Fear of Love, that's based on the 5 stages of grief where love is literal hell, that releases on Valentine's Day, like that game transcends its genre, you know?
Yeah.
It's an emotional experience. It doesn't matter if it was top down or it was isometric or whatever. It's me in a game form, and nobody else can copy that. They definitely can't copy it better than I can, right? So I am ahead of the game on that. Even if the game isn't actually successful, it will be artistically successful, right? Because I put me into that, and that's the best way to create something, I think, from an artistic perspective.
Yeah. And going back to your point about getting in the industry and thinking, I can just take on whoever is the big dog in that respective genre. Like, again, we see this, and this goes back to what we were just saying regarding people who try to copy somebody else's design. Like, I'll give you an example. FTL is a game that I really like, and I would love to see more people have their own take on it. But whenever I see a game says, oh, we're just like FTL, but so-and-so, I always come out of it feeling disappointed. Like, again, it feels like a lesser version of FTL. And as you said, like, why should I play your version of this game when I can still play the original one? Because they made the best version of that game. They made the best version of FTL. Derek, you made the best version of Spelunky. Scott Cawthorn made the best version of Five Nights at Freddy's. So you have to figure out what makes your game special. Like, as you said, somebody can copy every single aspect of your game, but they can't copy, why you made that game. They can't copy what drove you to do it. And that's that special something that you have to convey. Because if you're just trying to make the next Call of Duty or the next Fortnite, again, how are you putting yourself in that title? I didn't know there was a good version. That's probably up for another debate sometime. But
yeah, it's an age-old question, right?
And let me do a quick time check. We've been going for just about an hour. I figure maybe if we push another 20 to 30 minutes, if there's no more questions or we can't think of anything, we'll wrap things up sooner. So if anyone has any questions for Tim and I, and you're watching this live right now, please get them in the next few minutes. But I want to turn to what Chris said, because even though it's not a question, it is certainly an interesting idea. That like the next big indie hit. Again, everybody is chasing it. I'm sure right now, as we're sitting here, there are developers large and small trying to think what could possibly be next. Like, and that's something that I never really try to think about, because I think it always seems to be just too big of a question. Like, what do you think about that, Tim? Like, sitting there thinking, I'm going to predict what's going to be the next big trend in a year from now in the game industry.
I think for most people, it's a dumb question, because there's no right answer to it, because a lot of things are going to happen at the same time. But two, like, there are people that have predicted trend, right? But they don't have 100% accuracy. So in that case, like, they can always predict the next trend. They did it once. So if you look at their data, then technically it's kind of luck, And if you're just going to guess, you might as well just roll the dice and figure out what game to make. But as far as like figuring out like specifically how somebody's going to perform based on a trend, I think there are ways to do it, but I think most people that do are probably doing for the wrong reason, right? Like, I know I was in marketing for a long time, and when you would go to meetups or you'd go on forums for marketing, like, I was interested in learning how to market. But a lot of marketers get bad reputations because a lot of marketing guys, they're looking for the get-rich-quick stuff. They're looking for the how to make $10,000 in a weekend, how to fucking build a business, how to make 10 in a month with 5 minutes a day. And those are the headlines that sell stuff. But that's not the real way to build a business. That's not like the actual thing that you do. It's more like a gimmick. It's more like a temporary thing. And the people that are looking for that easy route, they're looking for the next trend. They're looking for Battle Royale's blowing up. I'm going to make a Battle Royale and make $1 million. Like, one, I feel like they're in the wrong industry, because if you want to make money quick, any kind of art-based industry is not right for you at all, right? And two, like making money in general, I feel like there are much better ways. I've built and sold a company. I've built multiple startups. I have had many, many different freelance jobs. Right now, if I want to make $1,200, I could do a website. Right, I could do SEO for somebody for $500 a month, $1,000 a month. Right, I can make all this amount of money just doing these things, but I don't like doing those. So it's much easier for me to make a website than to make a game. And I can make much more money doing that consistently on an everyday basis. I can make a website in a couple days. I could do a website every couple days and make $1,200 a pop and make a bunch of money in a month. And I could do that and I could be there, but I don't want to build websites. I want to build video games. So I think looking for the next trend in a video game is just bad. It's just an idea because by the time you identify the trend, it's either A, already a trend, so everybody's on it, so you're competing with someone else's product, or B, you're incorrect and you spend all this time thinking about stuff that doesn't really,
Yeah.
That's my thought.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that, Tim. Like as you said earlier regarding the Switch, by the time everybody reported that Nintendo Switch was going to be, the indie haven, everybody's already made it on there, and now it's kind of dried up by that point. And I think this kind of goes back to what's kind of become like our go-back statement for tonight, that it comes down to trying to make something that stands out because it's something that you want to make. Let's see. Chris is saying, yeah, but there's always that risk, I think, that if you're thinking about that niche, probably somebody else out there is doing that as well. I've spoken to a developer who he worked on a space sim or like a space turn-based strategy game. I think it was like 3 to 4 years he spent working on it, and he started this before there were too many space games being released. But then that span of time, everybody decided to go into space for that genre. So you have to be really careful in terms of, I think, just looking at things from a pure market perspective. Now, if you want to make a space game because you have this unique idea for it, I think that's a much better place to go than just saying, nobody's made a space game in 5 years, I'm going to make one, and surely everybody will go to it just because it is a space game.
Yeah, it's... What people don't realize is, like, when you're predicting the future, not only do you have to look outside. For example, the craze right now. You go back 10, 15 years. Some battle royale is.
Tim, you're kind of cutting really in and out there. Your picture's actually frozen on my end. Can you still hear me all right?
I hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's starting to get a little bit more stuttering here.
Dream is, I don't know.
Let's see. Yeah, you're still sounding like very roboticized.
Ooh, I don't know.
Wait, I think it's starting to get a little bit better. Try saying something.
Hello?
Microsoft updates on his end. I think you're a little bit better now. Let's see.
Okay. Okay. Microsoft updates suck. How about I say that?
There you go. And then just as you said that, it seemed to stabilize.
So, just to reiterate what I was saying, if everybody can hear me, I was just saying that, like, if you take a battle royale, for example, you go back 10 or 15 years, a battle royale is hardly technically feasible, right? So not only does the idea of a battle royale have to exist, but the technology behind 100 people being in the same server has to exist. The widespread use of broadband internet has to exist, right? The willingness for people to play a game for that amount of time has to exist. All of these things to come together that are disconnected for that to happen. So if you're predicting a trend, you can't just look at your industry. You can't say, oh, well, nobody's making any sci-fi games, so I should make one, and then it'll sell well because there's now they're coming out. Why are they not making sci-fi games? Maybe they tried for 10 years and nobody's buying sci-fi games, right? Mm-hmm. Or what else is happening? Is there an influx of sci-fi movies? Is everybody in their sci-fi fix off TV shows? Mm-hmm. Like, what's going on? Like, you have to have way more data than just your industry genre data. You have to kind of have a life experience and, again, that empathy to kind of understand the bigger picture. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people don't consciously have this, mm-hmm. right? A lot of people aren't like, I'm going to consciously predict this trend and understand the thoughts and feelings of millions of people in the world and then design a game to go viral, right? But things like Rogue Legacy happen, things like PUBG happen. I don't think either one of those games were intentionally designed to go crazy and be a massive hit. They were just designed based on what that person wanted in, right? And that's why I say it's always easier to discover than to design success, because if you work on multiple games, if you work on a bunch of different games, one of them is going to work better than the rest. And if you take that game and you iterate on that, I think you got a better chance than trying to look ahead, predict the future, and make a game based on future prediction. I've made 22 games in the last 2 years. One or two of them have done significantly better than all the rest of the game. Those are probably going to be my next projects, right? I'll probably work on those and iterate those and build those up to a Steam. I think discovering is easier than design sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, and as you said, like, you can certainly hope and pray that your game's going to be, like, $100 million bestseller and stuff like that, but you can't go into development with the intent that this game is going to sell 500,000 copies. You never know. And I think this is one of the things that we've been seeing in terms of that split between AAA and independent development. Like, you see investors of companies say, we expect this game to sell like 1.5 million copies, or we want like 5 million copies, or this series is not considered a success. But you can't, even if you have an established fan base, you can't really attach, I think, hard numbers. You can guesstimate, you can certainly go by previous games, but like what we're seeing with Call of Duty right now, in the span of last year to where we're at in terms of Call of Duty, we've had PUBG, Fortnite, again, all the other clones. We've seen more games as a service titles. We've seen even stuff that you wouldn't think would be the same, such as the rise of Gwent, Hearthstone, Mario. I mean, all these different factors definitely change, I think, the market. And it's almost I think it's a fool's errand to try and predict these things, especially when we don't know what's coming down the line.
Yeah. I think Chris is asking, is it better to avoid hot genres where you will have to compete with many big fish, or try and not on walls? See, that's the thing, is I think by the time the phenomenon is identified, especially when you take into account the dev side, and it's kind of what we've been talking about, by the time you've identified the trend, all of the games that are part of that trend spent the last year or two or more working on development, right? It's going to take you how long to make a game to fit in there, and then the trend can be bye-bye, right? So I don't think avoiding hot genres is a good idea. I don't think trying to jump on the train on hot genres is a good idea. I think somewhere in between, using your intuition, using your empathy, to build something that I think only you can build.
Yep, and again, like, and just as you said, what Chris was saying, like, if you can come up with something that is different, but the question is, can you come up with something in that same span of time or less that's still a quality product? Because I think that's another area that we see independent developers struggle with. I mean, this is maybe a lead into Gladius's question, and I think that will probably be our final question for tonight, is that independent developers are great at creating unique experiences, but iteration takes time, and more importantly, it takes a lot of money as well. This is again why companies like Blizzard and Nintendo are so entrenched in terms of their quality. Nintendo doesn't rush a video game. We don't see Nintendo spend 2 months and pump out a game. They will spend years figuring out every single aspect of this title, and by the time it comes out, it is uniquely Nintendo. And again, it goes back to what you've been saying. Like, the name Nintendo and the name Blizzard has weight attached to it. If Nintendo tomorrow announces they're working on their own Battle Royale game, people are going to still buy it, even if Fortnite is still king, because they know that this is Nintendo's own version of this. Or if Blizzard decides to make their own Fortnite game, Nintendo will put out ET, and But the point being that they're able to attach their own sense of identity to these titles. and they can still do it at a level of polish. When it comes to independent space, you can put your own spin on it, but if your game doesn't control as well or it's not as technically polished, people may just ignore it on that front. Because again, going back to Fortnite, if somebody puts out a better Fortnite in terms of gameplay, but it's buggy and it crashes or the UI isn't that good, nobody's going to switch. Why would they want to essentially downgrade that experience, even if it's to mean to get just a little bit of something better in another aspect?
It's important to look at who that person is too.
Yeah.
Like if Joe Nobody releases the buggy broken down battle royale, or Blizzard releases the buggy broken down battle royale, one of those is going to do better, right? Just by default, just by hands down branding and marketing ability.
Yeah.
And so like it's a bigger question than just hopping on the trend and getting the game right. You got to get the exposure right, right? Like people ask me, they're like, "Oh, Tim, you know, your game's always going to be a success. You have all these people on YouTube." I'm like, no, first of all, don't go there. Don't go there. Second of all, this is my first commercial release. This is my first Steam release coming in February, right? I am not planning on having a positive ROI. I don't think this game, especially considering how long it's taken to build, which is, you know, thousands of mistakes that are all on my YouTube channel about how all the mistakes. I don't think it's going to be a financial success. I have 32,000 people on YouTube. I have 10,000 people on Discord. I have 8,000 people on email lists. I have thousands of people, thousands, that are going to hear about this thing. I still don't consider it. I still don't think it's going to be a financial success. And that's not me being negative. I'm a very positive person. I just understand the dynamics of how difficult it is to get somebody to actually do something. And if I were jumping on a trend, I feel like I would have even less of a chance. However, I feel like the fact that I have an audience makes me better off than people that don't have an audience. Right? So I think there are other considerations outside of just making the right game that people consider. Developers tend to look at it like artists, right? If you make the perfect thing, everybody's going to love you. If you make the perfect game, it's going to be great, but you also got to get it in front of people.
Yep.
That's the other half of the equation. You can't just make the perfect game or the perfect art piece or the perfect movie. People have to see it. People have to view it. People have to, you know, play it.
Yep.
And if they can't do that, you're not going to get anywhere. And I think it depends on the type of personality you are. Like, I know personally, people tend to follow me for my personality and my thoughts and opinions and stuff like that on my channel. So I think there's going to be a lot of people that don't like File Folk that are going to buy it anyway, just because of my brand and my personal brand, the videos and the content that I put out and all that stuff. And that's okay. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. It's okay to have a powerful brand, just like Blizzard, just like Activision, right? Like, they can put their name on something and get sales just by doing it. And I think more people need to pay attention to the other half of things rather than just try and focus on the product, because marketing is part of the product.
Yep.
Right? How people see it is part of what it is. A lot of people don't get that.
Yeah. And again, there's so much that goes into game design that the consumer will never ever know about. Like we said earlier, just because a game was a success, you don't see how many years that team spent trying to build it, or all the prototypes and revisions and iterations that it took. And more importantly, you never really see the true costs. Again, you can hear, and like what Chris is saying right now, like 8,000 people times $10. Yes, that is certainly a lot of money. But you also have to realize how much of any profit you earn goes back into the cost of development. You know, if you spend 10 years of your life working on a video game, you know, $80,000 may be nothing. You could have spent several $100,000 trying to make that game, let alone, you know, any advertising you did, any, you know, outsourcing or bring in freelancers to help you with that title. And, like, that's one of the things I see from a lot of Steam forums, and like people complain about developers saying they're big rich, and like, oh, this game, it sold 250,000 copies and 1 million people bought it. So, you know, these developers are uber rich millionaires now. Of course, you know, they're being lazy because they don't want to keep working on this game. It's like, no, they are not millionaires, I bet, if that, you know, depending on how long it took to make that game.
I mean, there's so many hidden costs there. One, there's the Steam cut. There's the platform cut. They're going to take a percentage off the top. There's taxes. That's going to take a percentage off the top. On top of all that, you're going to be looking at all of the development costs and stuff that's spent on the game. And minus that, then you end up with the profit. On top of the profit, that profit has to last them long enough to make another game to keep the whole cycle going, right? So for them to even get to that point is like a dream. Most game developers would love it if they could just make enough money to continue making games. They don't even want to make profit, right? But Chris, specifically, you said 8,000 people at $10 would pay off college debts. So maybe I should just give specific numbers. I think Philophobia, I spent 4 years on, by the way. Not the entire 4 years. There's been months here and there where I haven't on it, but the project has lasted 4 years. I would be super happy if I sold 1,000 copies. And this is from a dude that has a big following on YouTube, has a big email list, has a big Discord channel, right? I would be happy if I sold 1,000 copies. I'd be happy with it. I actually don't expect to go there. I don't expect to make that happen. At least not month one. I think over the long term, I definitely get there. And it's not a confidence thing. It's not a positivity versus negativity, half glass half full type of thing. It's just understanding the nature of Steam, right? Steam is probably not a great platform to launch on right now. It's understanding how hard it is to actually get somebody to play me. It's understanding what I'm capable of pulling off in the next few months by myself, right? So there's a lot of stuff that goes into it, and I think too, once I actually get the data from a commercial release and I say, okay, this is what I did and this is the results I got, my next time I can do it better, right? And so even though I'm not going to be iterating on the same game, I'm going to be iterating on my launch, so I'm going to do it better next time. I'm going to make a little bit more money, maybe spend a little less time, right? Like if it technically with the game that I have in Philophobia, I could probably pull off in 9 months to a year. It didn't have to be 4 years. So what if my next game only takes that long and I can do the same sales number, right? And then do it again faster, right? Then that's technically 4 times the profit, right? If it takes a quarter of the time. So there's a lot of different stuff we got to think. And I would think long and hard about something before you threw all of your, before you remortgage your house or something based on a thought or a trend or something like that.
And as one final point, then we'll get to our final question. I've spoken to developers who their games sold less than 100 copies. And that is not a place you want to be, especially if you spend 4 years of your life working on something. But with that said, we got time for one final question, then we'll wrap things up, and we'll do like our little bit of self-promotion, I think, at the end there, and then we'll say goodnight. But we'll kind of tie Gladius's 2 questions together here. He asked, first off, why make games solo? You can never be an amazing programmer and amazing artist at the same time. Is it not better to team up with 2 or 3 people? And then he asked, is it possible to make an indie game while working a full-time 40 hours a week job? And I think both of these questions kind of work together here in terms of what it means to kind of work on a game. So, getting to his first point about why be a solo developer, I think it really is about that freedom of being able to work on a game whenever and however long you want. And I've seen this with many smaller teams, or even just one person, that they'll work either a full-time or a part-time job, and then maybe like an hour or 2 at night or on the weekends, they'll do a little bit of their game, and then a little bit more, and a little bit more. It really, I think, depends on the skill set, and I think what, again, you're trying to achieve. Like, if somebody's sitting there going, I can make Star Citizen by myself, or PUBG by myself, that may be a little bit of a stretch. But if you want to try your hand making like a platformer, or maybe even an RPG, you can certainly do that in your spare time, I think.
I agree. And Josh, I agree with you 100%. I think freedom is reason number one. There you have all the freedom. You can do whatever you want at any time. I think the people aspect is another part of it. I'm not a big people person. I happen to be a solo developer. It's not that I hate people. I love people. People are awesome. I just like to make my own stuff, by myself sometimes. I just want to put on some music and work alone, and I don't want to deal with people aspect of a team, because sometimes disagreements, right? Sometimes there are miscommunications. Sometimes there are things that happen, and that all takes a skill set that not everybody has. So if you gotta convince someone of your ideas, you gotta sell your ideas and you don't have the ability to sell your ideas, you're gonna come out of team project really bummed out because the other person is a better communicator than you, and they got their ideas in the game, and you're gonna be disgruntled about it, right? There's that, and then I think finally there's the actual expression aspect of it. So Philophobia, I told you, it's a game about the fear of love. It's a breakup. It's so personal to me. I can't let anybody else in this game, right? This is too personal of a game. This is like an interactive experience that represents my thoughts and feelings. Putting someone else on the project in anything outside of like a freelance role where I dictate exactly what gets done can't happen in my mind. It just can't happen. The game is too personal. That being said, I don't know if that's the most healthiest, positive thing to do. Because of that, it makes it so deeply personal that I tend to tie myself to it, and the success of it kind of scares me. Not the financial success, but the, you know, if I get that 4 out of 10 on some review site, that's gonna hurt.
Yeah.
Because this is all me. You know, this is all my personal heart and feeling into it. So, I think solo is not for everybody. It's really hard, especially going on 4 years. I'm so burnt out on my game. The last thing I want to do is work on it right now. And I've been super open about this on my channel. I hate my game right now. I hate it. I do not want to work on it at all. But I'm 2 months from launch, and I've got to make it happen because that's what you do. Like you gotta push forward and actually make things. You can finish it, right?
Yeah.
So I think there are definitely pros though. Like I gave you 3 pros. Some cons. You can get more done in a team for longer. You can have fun if you're working with people that you like. You can have a lot of fun in a team. You can have different skill sets. So, you know, it just matters what you want. And as far as like, it's possible to make in-game while working full-time 3 hours. Yeah.
And I want to elaborate or clarify a little bit more what you just said there, Tim, regarding the passion that goes into your game, because I think that this is probably too big of a discussion for like our final wrap up. But again, I see this a lot from developers, and passion is the fuel of this game, of this industry. People, like as we've been saying over like the last hour and a half almost, people don't get in this industry because they hate making video games. The whole success, as we've said, is about people putting themselves into these games, and putting themselves in is that level of passion. But you always have to weigh that passion with hard facts. As we've said, anybody can sit here and go, I can make the next Halo, or I can make the next Mario Brothers. How many of those people are actually going to have the skill, the energy, and just that dedication to be able to do that? Probably not that many of those people. And you have to be able to weigh what you want with what you can do. And as you said, like with your game, that it sounds like it's kind of way overdue, like in terms of trying to get this game out. And that's definitely not how you want to end a project. But sometimes that's just kind of how the cookie crumbles at the end of the day. And it's important, I think, as a game developer, that you have to balance your passion like that. As we've said, and I've seen this from a lot of first-time developers and students who they think that they can do everything, that it is going to be this perfect game, and I'm going to spend 5 years of my life, and then I'll never make another game again. But the people who survive in this industry are the ones who can balance their passion with the business side. They're the ones who go, yes, I could spend 3 years more of my life making this game, but there's no way I'm going to have a return on investment on this. It's probably better just to release this now and then take what I learned to another project than, again, trying to chase this dream. And it's very tough, I think, to say this because, like we've said, we've talked about passion projects that have worked out. Cuphead, Stardew Valley, Five Nights. I'm trying to think of something else. What was another game? Can't think of another example. I'm sure people in chat can probably think of a few. But these are games.
FTL before the Kickstarter.
I'm sorry?
FTL before the Kickstarter.
Exactly.
That was a passion project.
Yeah. And these are games that they worked because the developer put everything they had into it. But at the end of the day, though, these projects, I always say this, it's always a flip of a coin. Cuphead could have failed. It could have ended badly. These developers could have lost their homes because they put a second mortgage on their house to finish the game. The same thing goes for FTL, Darkest Dungeon. I mean, we're even seeing Minecraft, for instance. The second game from Mojang has, they turned it off. Like, it did not do anywhere near as successful as Minecraft was. And you have to be careful because even though a past success can help you, it doesn't guarantee, I think, future rewards.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the one thing worse than like launching your game
Mm-hmm.
and having it do horrible and having to deal with that, I think, is launching your first game and having to do really well.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've seen people
Oh,
that just
yes.
they don't know how to cope with that. They don't understand why their game did so well. It comes time for a second game and they can't recreate the lightning in the bottle, and
Mm-hmm.
that can be damaging. Whereas the lesson that you learn from
Mm-hmm.
selling 10 copies or 20 copies, I think, is more beneficial. Right? You're going to
Yeah.
take it more seriously next time. You're going to work harder. You're going to spend longer on the marketing plan. So yeah, I know people from both ends.
Oh,
I think
yes.
just gotta think ahead.
I mean, I could shake my head in agreement for the next 10 minutes on that point. And like I always say that whenever I hear about like somebody having their first success, I don't care about that anymore. I care about what they do after that success. Because as you said,
Yeah.
that's hard. When you've made 20 games on your own and they barely succeeded, it's very easy for you to kind of fail small like that. But what do you do when your game just sold 500 million copies and it's game of the year from IGN and Destructoid and so on, and then you're sitting there going, what am I going to make now? Like, can I even? You're basically competing with yourself in a sense at that point.
Yeah. Well, a lot of these guys retire after that. These are good. I haven't heard anything from Derek Hugh in a lot besides Spelunky 2.
Yeah.
But it's. I think you should plan on that. I think you should plan on
Mm-hmm.
the worst case rather than the best case.
Mm-hmm.
You should be prepared either way. And
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people I don't think they think that far, to be honest. I
Yeah.
think a lot of people I see they have the hope and pray method, and I think the hope and pray method is the worst method because
Mm-hmm.
that's then you get whatever the mark gives you. You don't ensure your success. I think even though Philophobia was not for me designed to be a financial success, I've taken measures to ensure that at least a few hundred people are going to play it, right? If not a few thousand. Everything I've done with my personal branding, everything on my YouTube channel, my email list, my landing page, all that stuff. So I know I have players.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people don't, and they need to think about that ahead of time. So I hope they do.
Mm-hmm. But I think that is a great point to end things on. Again, we could sit here for like few more hours and talk, but it is getting a little bit late. I forget, Tim, are you on East Coast time like myself or different?
I am on East Coast.
Okay. So it is about going on 10 o'clock at night. I know we're both starting to feel it. So I think it is time to wrap things up. So, for everyone watching this live or recorded, thank you so much for coming out. I'm going to do my little game wisdom speech and then I'll give it over to Tim. A few more hours. But for anyone new watching me, I put out daily videos on game design regularly here on Game Wisdom, as well as on my website, game-wisdom.com. We have a Patreon as well as our own Discord channel where we hang out and chat game design topics. Tim is also a member there. You'll find that link down below. I also have my first book on game design coming out on November 12th, looking at 20 essential games to study. That's going to be very exciting. I'll be probably mentioning that a lot more in the coming weeks. And, like I said, be sure to check back. I will probably do a little game stream later tonight as soon as my voice recovers. But I think that's it from my side. So, Tim, if you wouldn't mind for the folks watching, go ahead and do your own little PR speech.
Yeah, before I do, you should guys simply go buy his book. He'll link it. You'll hear about it in the future. But buy Josh's. I've been watching his streams for a long time, and I think he's got some good game wisdom, if that makes. But my name is Tim Ruswick. You can find me on Game Dev Underground. Just Google Game Dev Underground, you'll find my videos. I run a YouTube channel called Game Dev Underground. I also have a website. I'll pause a moment. There's a fantastic community in our Discord channel, and the for Game Dev Underground Discord channel is in all of my videos. So I recommend that out. But other than that, I'm happy to be here. It was fun chatting.
Awesome. And like I said, Tim, if you're free in the future and we get more questions, we can certainly schedule time to do another one of these.
Yeah, I'm down.
All right. And for people, one last thing, for people watching us right now, what is your streaming schedule if they're interested in watching you live?
So I do every Friday. I do a community. The first, I said screen. It's not Halloween anymore. Stream. And the first Friday of every month is a feedback Friday where I play people's games and I give feedback live on stream. It's cool because you get feedback live and watch me play, but you can also kind of get exposure for your game because that's one of our biggest streams of the month. And then in addition to that, I'm streaming Monday and Wednesday on Twitch only, which is my game development stuff, and that's probably going to go to 4 days a week on Twitch, twitch.tv/Tim Ruswick, because like I said, I have 2 months to finish, so I am working. Trying to finish that game up.
All right. So I better let you go so you can get back to working on it then. So with that said, we are going endings for this stream. So like I said, be sure to leave your questions down below for a future one. Check out Tim's Discord as well as his stream and be sure to check out my stuff as well because we both need to do marketing. I think I need to do more on my end. But